So session 11 in our Sunday school books, John chapter 9, be talking about the blind man being able to see again, and kind of that story here in the Bible. On the understanding the context page, I always try to underline the highlights here, so if somebody's listening that maybe don't know what's going on, it kind of sets the scene. It says, following his confrontation with the scribes and Pharisees, Jesus left the temple and encountered a man who had been born blind. Like many people, they associated illness with sin. Jesus revealed that God allows some conditions to occur to demonstrate His glory. So in this time, a lot of time, they would think, well, this person has an ailment. Them or their family must have did something that got them in this point. It says, this story not only magnifies God's power as the blind man gained sight, but also the greater blessing of his becoming a believer in Christ. As with other healings on Sabbath days, Jesus' action provoked the Pharisees when they learned of the healing. Because of the man's persistent affirmation of Jesus, the Pharisees threw him out of the synagogue. Talking about the blind man here. It says, compassionately, Jesus sought the man and revealed himself as the Messiah. The man believed Jesus and received a greater blessing than physical sight. And the unbelieving Pharisees, however, remained spiritually blind because of the hardness of their hearts. So, going with the same theme as we've talked about the past few weeks, Jesus is performing miracles. He's on the scene here, and you've got the religious leaders of the time. Here, the Pharisees are constantly just trying to attack him and try to, find something that he's going to do wrong, so they can, say, "Ha ha, we told you." He's not who he says he is. But as we all know, again, they're going to fall short and fail here doing that. But going straight in, John chapter 9, we'll read verses 24 and 25 first. It says, Then again called they the man that was blind, and said unto him, Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered and said, Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. So the Pharisees are saying, you need to give God the praise here. It's not this guy Jesus that, healed you if he really did. And in Polk County language, the guy that was blind says, I don't know if he's a sinner or not, but all I know is I was blind this morning and now I can see. It says the backdrop for the story in John chapter 9 was the belief in a connection between sin and suffering. Jews believed if a person was suffering, they must have sinned. And if a person sinned, that they would suffer. Particularly related to blindness, Deuteronomy 28 stated that if the Israelites walked in disobedience, the Lord would afflict them with blindness. And by the time of the New Testament, Jews had come to believe if somebody was born blind, either the parents or the newborn must have sinned. A lot of times, even in our day and age, a lot of people connect sickness with somebody doing something bad. A lot of times, somebody that we would call good, or, that from a worldly standpoint, doesn't do a lot of bad in the world's eyes, but say, how could somebody so good be struck with this illness? Well, it don't always work that way, God works in mysterious ways that a lot of times, most of the time, 99% of the time, we don't have the answers as to why things are happening the way they do. And we just got to trust that, hey, God has a plan, and it's not always that somebody just gets struck with an illness because of something maybe they did, or maybe so. It can't go either way. But it says, Jesus explained to his disciples that the man had been born blind, not because of sin, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. That's John 9, verse 3. And so, God's will is always going to work out the way it should. It always will. The Pharisees interrogated the man whom Jesus healed, and not getting the answers they sought, they interrogated the man's parents. So they're, trying to come after him, and he's not necessarily telling them what they want to hear, so they're going to go to his parents. They're going to go to any extreme as they can to get somebody to say what they want to hear. No different than the world today. If people want to believe something, they're going to keep asking somebody until that person says exactly what they want to hear. And that's like the itching ears that we hear about in the world. It says the religious leaders gave the man an imperative. Give God the praise. They were instructing the man to give credit to God rather than to Jesus. Again, they're so lost that they don't see that this is God in human form right here. So they're saying give God the praise. Well, in reality, the guy don't know who Jesus is at the moment, but he is giving God the praise. Jesus is God. It says, next, the Pharisees emphatically declared about Jesus, "We know that this man is a sinner." And the basis for this statement was the fact that Jesus had healed the blind man on the Sabbath, which meant he certainly was not of God. Again, back to the Sabbath. They're missing the point of that something of a blessing and a miracle from God is happening. And they're saying, well, you can't do this on this day. And we already have learned and heard about where Jesus is nicely telling them, don't you think my Father, don't you think He's okay with me healing somebody, bringing glory to Him? You're taking things out of context. And it says, imagine this one. It says, additionally, to make mud by mixing saliva and dirt was viewed as kneading dough, which was also prohibited on the Sabbath. I mean, they had rules just about for everything that they could just point to constantly. It says, he refused to say whether the one who healed him was a sinner. Instead, he stubbornly held to and proclaimed the one fact he knew for certain. I was blind and now I see. So this man at this point, not from a spiritual sense yet, but he knows that his life has been physically changed. Again, we haven't gotten to where he's going to be spiritually changed yet. But from a physical standpoint, this guy, a few hours ago, couldn't see nothing. It's just darkness. He doesn't know what anything looks like. And now he knows, well, I can see. This guy that I came into contact with, he said, I don't know his life. I don't know what he's did. I don't know where he's from. But I know now that I can see. Going on here, reading verses 26 through 29 first. It says, then said they to him again, what did he to thee? How opened he thine eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you did not hear. Wherefore would you hear it again? Will you also be his disciples? Then they reviled him and said, thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciple. We know that God spake unto Moses, as for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. So, before we even read here what the book says, in short, he's kind of nicely saying, I done told you what he did, and you didn't listen. So I'm going to tell you again, and if I tell you, are you going to follow him now? That's kind of how I envision him saying that there. It says, the Pharisees maintained their united front. They asked him exactly what happened. And unfazed by their authority and social importance, the beggar stood up to one of the most respected, established, intimidating Jewish groups of this day. So you think about it. When God does something in our life, there's just it's not a power, but you feel compelled to, I'm going to stand up for it, right when something like that happens. You think about salvation, you're on fire. Right after it happens, you're on fire. You're going to tell everybody in the world that you come into contact with about what happened. And a few weeks go by, a few months, and you kind of don't necessarily go back to your old ways, but they're not on fire like you should. So, again, he don't know who's healed him yet. He don't know that it's Jesus Christ, but he's, going to keep up with what he's telling them and saying, look, I'm not changing my story. Here's what happened. And he says, I have told you already, and you did not hear. Will you also be his disciples? So I kind of, put that in another language, Polk County language. You see what he did with me, so are you going to follow him now? I kind of think in this guy's head at this time, he's thinking, y'all hear from people that have known me my whole life. I've been blind, and now I can see. What else do you need to see that this guy is good? It says the Lord had spoken with Moses face to face, and the Lord gave his covenant directly to Moses, and this was the authority on which these leaders stood. But what these leaders didn't understand was that Jesus was God in the flesh. And how did they miss that? They know all these rules, they know all these technicalities. How did they miss all the prophecies in what they had as the scriptures, the Old Testament we look at? How did they miss all this to not know this is Jesus, this is the Messiah? It says the Pharisees mocked the uneducated beggar, telling him, thou art his disciple. We're Moses' disciples. So again, same thing we see in our world. They take their stature. We're the elite. We're not going to listen to some homeless guy. We're not going to listen to somebody that we've, never really had any encounter with. That's how a lot of times we're looked at. We're just, go into our 9 to 5, blue-collar jobs, and then people say, why should we listen to you? You don't have a PhD in this, what makes you a doctor, right? We hear all stuff like that, but in reality, from a spiritual standpoint, it don't matter if you're the highest educated or the lowest educated, right? If you believe in Christ, He views us all as his servants and we need to serve him.
Right.
It says the Pharisees knew where Moses' words had come from, that God spake unto Moses himself. Where Jesus had come from, wherever that was, comparatively had to be completely insignificant. Therefore, they thought his words were inconsequential. And I think they were, these Pharisees this time. And, I'm sure it's just like anybody in our world. I'm sure there were Pharisees that eventually, some maybe left some of those things and believed on the Lord. But we know for a fact there were some that absolutely didn't too. And you think about that, they're so close to knowing him. They're this close, but yet they're so far away. I mean, they know what the Scriptures say. They know all about God, in a sense, so they think. Yet they don't know that Jesus is God, in human flesh, walking right amongst them. I think, I can't prove this, but you have to think that Jesus is walking amongst them, and as they're constantly challenging him, he's thinking, I'm right here. All you got to do is believe, and y'all are just missing it. And a lot of times that can happen in our life. When we know the right things to do, or we know what God's telling us to do, and it's this easy to make the decision, yet we still just choose to do the wrong decision. Choose to follow the world. And that they were just so close, yet so far away. And what I'm getting at by that is it don't matter how close you are. You can be the closest you can to accepting salvation, or you can be the furthest away of getting it. But the bottom line is, this person who's this close and this person so far away, it don't matter. They die. There's not a little entrance that says, well, you made the 72, but you need to make a 75. Nope. A 40 and a 70 is the same thing there, right? You either know him or you don't, is what I'm trying to get at. Reading verse 30 here. It says, the man answered and said unto them, why? Herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened mine eyes. Now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshipper of God, and doeth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. And they answered and said unto him, thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. So again, we hadn't gotten to the verses yet, but this guy knows something. The former blind guy, he knows something about this guy that healed him, something special, and he's nicely saying, somebody that could do this, somebody that could heal the blind, are you telling me that he is not a believer in God? Are you telling me he's not a worshiper of God? How are you telling me he's not associated with God when only somebody that is can do what he just did? It says he pointed out that God heareth not sinners, but he does listen to the worshiper of God who obey him. So, again, what he's saying is, for this man to do what he just did, he's a follower of God. He believes in God. Again, he don't know who it is yet, so you gotta put your mind in that cap. But he understands. He has enough sense, and he's not, the most educated person, but he has enough sense to know there's something divine about what just happened to me being able to see. Because he says, if this man were not of God, he could do nothing. He says, trapped by the man's logic, the Pharisees responded by attacking the man himself. Again, let's jump back to the modern day world. What does that sound like? When you not necessarily trap somebody, but you show them the truth and something they don't like, what do? They start attacking. They start trying to put blame somewhere else or turn attention to somebody else. The truth of it is, the world don't like truth. They don't. Because a lot of times truth kind of knocks us down and shows us where we're wrong. And when you tell the world, the lost world, that they're wrong, they don't like that. A lot of Christians don't like being told we're wrong. Yeah. But the truth of it is we come here, and I say this a lot. It's good to, leave church and feel revived and good. It was a great service. But you need to be leaving church sometimes saying, wow, man, I'm falling short. I could be doing this better. We don't come to church to have a good time and have a party. And, that's not what we're here for. We're here to learn more about Christ. We're here to kind of get put in our place a lot of times and try to keep our life constantly focused on Him. It says, having nothing else in their arsenal, they cast him out, meaning out of the synagogue. So, They didn't argue back and forth with him, and they see that he's not changing his story. So just like the world today, all right, you ain't siding with what we want you to say. We got to have you out of here because you ain't going to help our message keep growing. You can go be on the Jesus team, but you got to get out of here. So when people see the truth, they either turn from the ways they're doing and follow the truth, or they just flat out reject it. And we see here, they've had enough of it. They're saying, look, man, you may not dress like us. This guy may have healed you and made you be able to see, but if you ain't going to give praise who we want you to, if you're not going to say what we want you to, you got to get out of here. It says the Pharisees had become so engulfed in their own anger that they failed to remember that God had promised the blind would receive sight at the dawn of the Messianic age. It references Isaiah 35 and 42. So what the lesson's trying to say here is, again, they know all these things from just know it in their brain, but from a spiritual sense, they've missed it. Saying here that, hey, it was already talked about in Isaiah that there would be healings like this when the Messiah was here. We get lost on things, and sometimes when we do that, we just need to go search the Scriptures. When people want to talk about things, well, what is the world doing today? Well, let's see what the Bible says about it, if that lines up. Because if we ain't careful and we don't ever study our Bible, or we don't associate ourselves with other believers, we can get caught in the traps of the world. We can believe certain things are right that aren't right. And in reality, it don't matter if it's me saying it, or Joey saying it, or David saying it, whoever. If the Bible don't line up with it, we're not right. And being a Christian, kind of what this guy's dealing with here at this time, it comes with saying things that not everybody wants to hear or that they like to hear. We got to remember that, nowhere in the Bible does it tell us we're going to make lots of friends for believing in this stuff. It pretty much says the opposite, Think about it. Jesus surrounded himself with 12 people, right? And those 12, it only took one. He only had, think about that. We know more than 12 people, but he had, 12 that were closely following him. He didn't have to grow it to 14 or 15. He only had to have 12, and one of them already turned on him, right? Yep. So you don't need to think that, just because you have a lot of friends, just be reality. If you got a lot of friends, a lot of those friends are going to be snakes and be enemies. And we need to be careful talking to ourselves too here. If we have people that we call our friends, you don't need to be going off talking about them to other people or laughing at them behind their back. That's not what we're called to do. Right. We're called to be Christians. Right. Christians means we tell people the truth. We tell them about Christ. We love them. We forgive them. We keep telling them the truth until we die. Don't mean that every one of our friends are going to change the way they live. But they need to know that when we die, well, I know what Connor stood for. I may not have agreed with him for everything he said, but I knew what he stood for. And you know what? Again, I always say this. I don't want a preacher to have to stand over me lying at my funeral. I don't want that. I don't want to put that burden on somebody. If my family goes and says, well, Joey, we want you to preach Connor's funeral, and he has to, scratch his head and think, well, what am I going to say? What am I going to say about that guy? Going on, verse 35. Here we go. It says, Jesus heard that they had cast him out. So Jesus just learns, hey, Pharisees have thrown you out, bud. And when he found him, he said unto him, dost thou believe on the Son of God? And the guy answers here, it says, he answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? So, before Jesus says one more thing here, verse 36, the guy has a desire to believe on the Son of God. Right here, he says, who is he that I might believe on him? Verse 37, and Jesus said unto him, thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Boom. We always go into these salvation verses, and everybody goes to John 3:16, and, what do I got to do here? Hey, turn here to John chapter 9.
Yeah, right.
2 or 3 verses right here. So we see that the whole kind of lesson we're seeing here, anytime he talks to the Pharisees, that he has a changed heart. He don't know what he believes on, but he knows God has sent this person and did this. This is all God making me be able to see. And Jesus, comes in when the world has turned their back on him, And everybody don't want anything to do with him. Jesus is right here to scoop him up.
Right.
And in Polk County language says, look, I'm the one that healed you. I'm the Son of God. All you got to do is believe on me. And we see that he wants to do that. He says, Lord, I believe. And then he worships him. It says, reading through the other Gospels, we see more instances of Jesus healing blind people than any other miracle. And if you got your book on 106, he goes through every time just about, Jesus is healing somebody of blindness from Matthew, Mark, Luke. It says, can you imagine the man's excitement when he again heard the voice of the man who had rubbed mud in his eyes? So we was talking about this last week. Again, if this is a movie, that they're wanting dramatic effect, and don't mean it's biblical when they do that, but you imagine that when that guy hears that voice, because you got to think, when you're blind, or when you lose a sense, your other ones are heightened. So when he's blind, that voice is really, that sound is going to stick in his head. And so he's been thrown out of the synagogue. I think probably in reality he could care less about that because he hadn't been seeing his life, and now he can see. But then when he hears that voice again, it's got to be like, this is the guy that just did this. I'm going to listen to what he's saying. It says to believe did not mean simply accept facts about the Son of Man. Jesus was asking the man if he put his trust in him, the Son of Man, for forgiveness and salvation. Again, it's such a simple concept that don't have to be complicated. But salvation and believing on the Lord isn't just saying, yeah, I believe it. Yeah, I believe what's written there in the gospel. I believe he was born, virgin. It's not just saying it. And again, we always say this, you can fool everybody in here, but you can't fool God. You can stand here and say you believe it, but do you just believe it just to believe what's written on the Word? Or do you really believe it? Do you really turn your life over to him and say, I'm trusting you, Lord. I know I'm a sinner. I know I've fallen short, but I believe what's happened here. And this guy, he had, I like to say on this one, his wasn't that hard. The guy was blind. And Jesus makes him see. But think about that. Not saying that those things couldn't happen again, but you know what I'm trying to say here. The people we're coming into contact with that maybe say they're in a wheelchair or say they're blind. Now, God can do anything he wants. But we're not seeing that kind of happening here today, if you know what I'm trying to say. So these people that maybe say that have an ailment, you can't have this, well, I'll believe on the Lord if he does this for me. It's not a negotiation. He don't have to do anything, period. You can't treat Jesus as somebody you're bargaining with. Well, get me out of this and I'll do this, right? So what we have to do is make sure that we understand the Bible enough to be dangerous enough to tell people about it, right? We got to know what we're talking about. We can't just say things and hope, well, Connor seems to be having a decent life, so I guess I'm going to believe on this Jesus he keeps talking about. No, it don't work that way. It says, though, Jesus could have responded to the guy, I am he. But instead, he referred to the man's healing as one evidence of the Messiah's identity. Thou hast both seen him, lest there be any doubt as to this man. And Jesus told the man, it is he that talketh with thee. So, when you see, thou hast both seen him, well, the guy hadn't saw for long. He's only came into contact with a few people that he saw. So Jesus is saying, you saw the Son of God. But then, just in case there's any doubt in the guy, Jesus tells him, it's me that you're talking to. So, I imagine the guy when he hears those words. Again, we see what happens here. He believes on him. But just imagine the excitement. You think about that from an eternity standpoint. You don't call it fire insurance. We've always heard that term. But when you have salvation, it's an exciting experience to know my life's changed. And I don't have to worry about being in an eternity of torture. I'll be with Jesus when I die. But again, salvation isn't just the fire insurance where you say, well, I'm going to get saved so I know I ain't going to hell, and then I'll go back doing whatever I want to do. It don't work that way. And I may be making a bold statement, may step on feathers, but if people believe that they can just do that, I got a hard time believing that's real salvation. Because Jesus is going to change your life. He's going to change your hearts and desires that you're not going to want to think that way. That's not salvation.
Right.
It says this man's response is a reminder that worship is the natural response for anyone who has had a life-changing experience. Again, after salvation, anytime we're in here, we should want to do things that turn back to God. We should want to put focus on Him. I mean, that's like it says, that's just natural. And just like this guy, he's excited when it happens before he even knew who did this. He knows it's something of God. And I'm not going to back down to you nicely dressed religious experts. I'm going to tell you, yeah, God did it. But God put this guy here. It all points back to God. But they did not want him giving any praise to Jesus. Again, because to them, Jesus is a threat. Just like He is to the rest of the world. Because, let's just be honest with ourselves. If the whole entire world believed in Jesus and truly worshipped Him, you wouldn't need any governments to have these rules and laws. And they know, when people know, if the whole entire world believed in Jesus Christ, institutions would fall left and right. There wouldn't be stock markets. There wouldn't be retirements. There wouldn't be insurance. It would just be, we're relying on the King. So Jesus is a threat to the world. And He knew that walking, right? Mm-hmm. He knew that He was going to be crucified because they couldn't take it. They couldn't take the truth. Just like our world can't today. It says the unnamed beggar had begun the day both physically and spiritually blind. And all of that changed, though, because of this encounter with Jesus. God works in mysterious ways. Everything happens for a reason. He has a plan. But this is also a story, too, of maybe somebody's struggling. And, they don't know they want to make this turn to believe on Christ. This story is also one, though, that shows you how quick life can change. This guy woke up blind, and he's going to sleep being able to see. From a morbid standpoint, just that quick, we could all be here in this church. We could turn right around and have a heart attack later, or not wake up in the morning. We just don't know how quick life can change on us, and that's why it's so important that don't wait on salvation, because you're not promised 10 minutes from now. We're not promised the next second. If anybody's out there listening and questioning, there's only one answer. It's Jesus Christ. It's the guy that we're talking about here in this story. The guy that made this guy be able to see. And He's the only way to heaven. And it's sad because the world, we were talking a little bit about this morning. If you tell somebody that, Jesus is the only way, automatically, boom, you're a bigot. Yep. You're not unified. You just are judgmental. No, I'm not. I'm telling you what the Bible says. And with anybody. I expect this of anybody in any religion or any job. If you believe something, don't you tell people about it? Don't you stand firm? Right? Do you think if the meteorologist sees a tornado coming and he sees it on video, do you think he's going to say, it's just clearly sunshine today, nobody's got nothing to worry about? No, he's going to tell you there's a tornado coming, seek shelter now.
All right.
If we believe this Bible, we got to stand firm on it. Mm-hmm. Everything that it says in it. It's going to say a lot of stuff that's going to irritate us. Anybody ever, liked having a little more money? It's getting tax time and everybody likes that. Well, guess what the Bible tells us? It says if you worship it and love that, for the love of money. Right? I mean, we can all sit here and throw darts at there's sins all in here and things that we all fall short on. But the bottom line is, that's as long as we're here, we need to be working on those things. And we need to be telling people about Jesus. Because, if you could build the absolute 100% best Christian, they would rely on nothing and trust Jesus. They could walk out of their house with no shoes and raggedy clothes if you're just trusting in Jesus and trusting that He's going to provide for you. But we need to be firm, just like this guy is, as he's talking to the Pharisees. He never loses focus. He never denies, well, maybe it wasn't, the Son of God. Maybe it wasn't somebody of God. No, he stands firm and says, look, somebody that can, take spit and rub it with mud and rub my eyes and make me see, there's something about him, something about this guy. And at this time, he has no idea he's going to come right back into contact with Jesus who did it for him. But he didn't lose the faith there. Same thing we need to be doing, y'all, is just telling people about the Lord, not backing down, and not worrying about the consequences. That's easier said than done, but in reality, if we're going to be the ideal, best Christian we can be, it's relying on Him. Hey, you may lose your job. And Jesus don't say that, well, don't talk about me at your job, because that's going to be your money. No, He says, talk about me everywhere. Go tell the world, right? Also, you don't ever see in here where He tells these guys that's going to follow Him that, hey, look, y'all follow me, I got you a good retirement package, we're going to have you a nice home over here on the coast and watch oceans. He don't ever tell them that. He don't ever tell them they're not going to die. But throughout His whole time, He's telling them, they're going to crucify me, and if they hate me, they hate you. Now, some people may say, well, that don't sound like really a religion I want to follow. Hey, you don't need to worry about what's on this earth. You may have to suffer a little bit, and that's okay, because you're suffering for the Lord. But if you don't follow Him, if you don't make that turn, it's going to be an eternity of suffering. And that's the way, it's just the reality of it. It may sound like a brutal message point to end on, but you either follow the Lord or you don't. And we need to go out making sure that we are trying to tell people about Him and telling them the truth and not worrying about what the world says. Mr. Funk?
Sure. I was thinking when He healed the blind man, and I've said this before, when he does some type of miracle, it's always a miracle you can't refute. It's not like a guy all of a sudden 2 weeks ago got blind. He was blind from the beginning. See, the lepers, things like that. If you ever saw a healer on TV, nobody knows what they're healed. But the point was, the Jew was always looking for a sign. The Bible tells us that. So every time Christ would do a miracle, there was always a Jew there, because it always says in the Bible that the Jew seeks after a sign. Now we as the Greeks seek after intelligence. Oh, you're smart. You got PhD, as you were saying earlier. Doesn't make any smarter than anybody else. You might be I know people that got PhDs, the dumbest people I've ever met in my entire life. And the other thing you always have to do is, I was witness to a lady the other day, and I said, you can use any sin. So just say, adultery. Is it okay to commit adultery? And one person says yes, one person says no, one person says it. Well, when you decide what is right and wrong, you become God, and you will decide everything right and wrong. See, you think you're God. And when you become a Christian, God decides what's right and wrong. And the Bible decides what's right and wrong. As we as Christians, we still sin, but we should, follow the Lord and do what's best. But that's the problem with most people. They want to be their own God, and they'll decide, should I take drugs? Should I do this? Should I murder? Should I do that? I'll decide what's right. That's our society today.
It's true.
They don't like absolutes. The world hates absolutes. And when you talk about absolute, then you're judgmental. You're judging me. Nobody's judging you. Just trying to help you out. It's like, if you tell something what they need to do, just like your kids. Your kids want to sin all the time, right? You're trying to correct them from sinning because you love your children and you don't want them to go through things maybe you had to go through in life, And then their children should make their children try to get them to be better Christians, So, but anyway, that's the one thing you always see in the Bible, that every time the Lord or the disciples did miracles, the Jews were always around, and it was a sign to them that it was of God. And they didn't see it at all. It's amazing.
Yep. Anybody else?
Good breakfast.
Thank you for cooking, Mr. Funk.
I ate it. I didn't want to, I want to be with the women today.
All right, David, you want to close us?
I would thank you again for the day and for the blessings we've had, Lord. We thank you for the fellowship we had this morning and this lesson today, Lord. We ask you to touch our hearts and minds, Lord, and help us to know that we do need to follow you, for you are the way, the truth, and the life, and there's no other way to the Father other than through you, Lord. And help us to understand that and show that to a lost and dying world. And guide us now as we go through the remainder of this day with our service, Lord. Have your way. And Lord, let us worship you in spirit and in truth. And if there's anyone here today or on the line, Lord, that doesn't know you in the free pardon of sin, help them come to you today, Lord, and just accept that gift of salvation, Lord. And thank you again for all you do for us, and we thank you for this church and for everyone here.